So, why
All right.
can't I believe in goblins?
You could believe in goblins depending on what your evidence was and depending on what kind of view you had of the world.
But, like, if I have no evidence for it, I just want to believe in goblins. Like, I just feel like it'd be really cool if goblins existed, and so I believe in them.
Have you ever been able to convince yourself to believe something by wanting to believe it really hard?
No, I think I'm too introspective for that.
I think there's a deeper problem than that. There are a lot of cases in life where it would be really useful for us to believe certain things and it would really help us out, right? Like if you're about to go on stage and give a presentation, if you were really confident that you were going to kill it, there's a lot of psychological evidence that says being confident would help you perform better. If you're an athlete, there are a lot of cases where we know it would help us if we believed certain things and we really want to believe those things. Sometimes we really want to believe good things about ourselves, good things about our friends, good things about our family members. But wanting to believe something usually isn't enough to allow us to believe it. And I think that's like a psychological fact about how humans are built and about what belief is that isn't really about the fact that you're a particularly introspective person.
I see. Interesting. What about under the influence of certain drugs, though, like disassociatives that can make one more
Good.
susceptible to like, or hypnosis even?
Right. So, one thing you can do is you can indirectly put yourself in a position where you're more likely to wind up with certain sorts of beliefs. So, for instance, there are a lot of organizations that you're only allowed to be a member of if you have certain beliefs. So, for instance, certain religious organizations. And if I lived in a society where it would be really beneficial to me to be in that religious organization, and I knew that in order to join the religious organization, I had to have certain beliefs, I might do certain things to try to convince myself of those religious beliefs. I might devote a lot of time to reading certain religious texts. I might go hang out with people who had those beliefs, right? So there are a lot of indirect things you can do to put yourself in a position where you're likely to form particular beliefs. And taking drugs is one of those things, right? But what you can't do is just, to coin a phrase, will to believe something.
Yeah, it's
That's
like
not an
that
option that we.
Schopenhauer quote, like, a
Yeah.
man can do what he wills, but he cannot will what he wills. And I think a similar thing can be said for belief. Interesting stuff. I guess there is a deeper thing, though. Like, we tend to privilege certain evidence over others. Like earlier I said, I joked that I'm too introspective for that. So like I may privilege like introspection over like my like sensory inputs, but other people may privilege their sensory inputs over their own thinking.
Right. Right. And there's a big dispute among philosophers here. So there are some philosophers who think that whatever your evidence is, it admits of exactly one correct conclusion, right? Given whatever your evidence is, if you and your friend have the same evidence about some matter and you're privileging one part of it and your friend is privileging another part of it, at least one of you is doing something wrong because there is one correct way to process your evidence and one correct set of conclusions you should get to. Those people believe in something called the uniqueness thesis. And the uniqueness thesis says any body of evidence gives you exactly one correct conclusion. And if you don't draw that conclusion from that evidence, you made a mistake somehow. I don't think that's right. I actually think that there are real life cases where different people look at their evidence differently and privilege different parts of their evidence. And that's totally okay. And that's exactly as it should be.
Surely like you can have like a bunch of like evidence or a bunch of facts about the world and draw multiple conclusions from them.
Right. Okay. So look, if I learn that one of my kids was late for school this morning, there's a lot of conclusions I'm going to draw from that. I'm going to draw a conclusion that they're going to be marked tardy, that I'm probably going to get an email about it, that it's going to hurt their performance in their class, et cetera, et cetera. Okay. So those are conclusions about different matters. But now pick one particular matter. So am I going to get an email later today? Yes or no? About that one matter, the uniqueness thesis says, given my evidence, there's a right answer. So if you and I have the same evidence about my kids and their school and whatever else was going on this morning, and I decide I'm definitely getting an email later, and you decide, no, you're not getting an email later, The uniqueness thesis would say at most one of us can be right.
So what's the difference between that and, say, like, the law of excluded middle? Like, you can't have a statement and the opposite of that statement be true.
Okay, because what you should believe on the basis of your evidence is not entirely dictated by what's true. There are a lot of cases where it's very reasonable for someone to believe something, even though that thing turns out to be false. For instance, there was a big chunk of human history way before the ancient Greeks, right? In sort of prehistorical times, where it was really reasonable for people to believe the earth was flat, right? All their evidence, all they ever got was like, hey, it kind of looks roughly flat. As far as the eye can go, we can keep seeing it. It certainly wouldn't have been reasonable for those people to believe the earth was a sphere or whatever the heck the earth is. It's not a perfect sphere, but they had no evidence that the earth was round. And so it could have been perfectly reasonable for those people to believe the earth is flat, even though that was false. So truth and falsehood don't always dictate what it's reasonable for you to believe on the basis of your evidence.
So how do we know when we have enough evidence? Like, I feel like if I was like a caveman, I would look at the earth and I would be like, yeah, it's probably flat. And then I'd look at the moon and be like, the moon is a disc. So, like, we're probably like a disc.
Though, actually, historically, if you look all the way up through Aristotle, Aristotle's conclusion from a lot of this was things in space and at the level of the moon and beyond operate according to totally different laws than things on Earth. Right? So notice you're looking at this evidence, you're looking at the earth and you're looking at the moon and the moon is round and you're like, oh, I guess I'll conclude that the earth is round because the earth and the moon have to operate the same. That's actually a very sort of like newfangled way of looking at the universe in the history of human, thought. What most people for, millennia concluded is, gee, I guess things up there are very different from things down here. Right?
What led them to believe that?
Look, there are a lot of different versions of this, and all the ancient Greeks had different views. And of course, people had very different views in ancient China and ancient India and all these different places. Aristotle famously thought that things in the celestial sphere tend to move in circles, whereas things on Earth tend to move in straight lines. And he had all sorts of interesting evidence for this. I mean, again, you look up at the sky and you track the moon and the stars, etc. And those things, and the sun for that matter, and those things tend to be moving in cycles, right? Whereas you hold a rock and you drop a rock and it just goes plonk down to the ground and stops. And the answer is we often don't. Because what we're talking about here is we're talking about induction, reasoning from patterns, right? There are cases when you're doing deductive logic, when you have P, if P then Q, therefore Q, right? When you're doing deduction, when you're doing logical inferences like that, then if your premises logically entail your conclusion, no information you could gather beyond that will ever change that conclusion. Okay, so when you have a logical proof, when you have a mathematical proof of a conclusion, then it is established and nothing you learn later will ever change your mind. That's what's great about mathematics. If someone proved a theorem in 1824, the mathematicians aren't like, gee, we know a lot more about the world now than we knew in 1824. Maybe that theorem is wrong. Nope. Once a theorem is proved, it is established, no matter how much extra evidence you get. Unfortunately, induction doesn't work that way. Reasoning from patterns, scientific reasoning, it's always possible that you could get some evidence later that would change your mind. And so that means when you're doing inductive reasoning, scientific reasoning, you actually never know that you're done. There is no way to know that you've collected all the evidence and no further evidence will ever change your mind.
Okay, so like, let's say like I lose my memory, right? Like, and I have some memories, not all of them. And so like I can like look at my memories probably and like deduct certain patterns about like who I am, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like, oh, I remember like interviewing this guy. What was his name? Mike Titelbaum. Like, I know that your last name's Titelbaum, right?
Yes, right.
Okay,
yes.
yeah, I was making
But
sure
we're
that.
imagining your memory is
Yeah,
lost.
yeah. So it's fine.
I'm not insulted by, forgetful you. Yeah.
Yeah, not real me. Yeah, I was telling my dad like I'm interviewing Mike Titelbaum, and he was like, You mean Titelbaum?
It's
Anyways,
fine. Yeah.
so
So
yeah,
you've forgotten all these things and you've got partial memories is where we
so
were.
like, is there a way to know that like I have like enough evidence to go on and like lead my life and like do most of the things that I need to do, like maybe like 80%? Not obviously I wouldn't be able to
Yeah.
quantify it, but like
Right.
qualitatively, can you get a how can we get a feel for, because
Right.
like I could kind of know like if I know, it's weird because like if you know like a little bit about something, you feel like you know a lot, but then when you know a
Mm-hmm.
lot, you feel like you know a little.
Mm-hmm. It's funny what you said about quantifying this because, of course, what I do for a living is quantify these things. So I actually work on theories that assign numbers to these things, right? I think the answer is, look, a lot of times we're just forced to move ahead in life without knowing enough information. And what you do is, like I said, I quantify things. So I look at, for instance, decision theory. If there's a decision I need to make and I have partial information, what I might try to do is gather more information before I'm forced to make the decision, right? Or sometimes I'm forced to make a decision just stuck with the information I have now, right? And then I don't have a choice. I just make the best judgment I can given the information at my disposal. And then there are these really interesting results in decision theory about when it is useful to gain more information. Okay. And in fact, you can quantify that. A really good example is when you're playing poker. So people who play poker for a living, right? Someone makes a bet ahead of you and you don't know what their cards are. And one thing you can do is you can call their bet, you can meet their bet in an attempt to just get more information about what their cards are and whether you're winning the hand or not, right? Or if you're playing a game like, Texas Hold'em, there are more cards that are going to be revealed to you, and you can essentially pay money to see more cards. And so what you've got to do in poker is you've got to make a judgment. Given the information I have now, I could pay to get more information, but would that be worth it? And in a poker game, at least, you can quantify these things, right? You know how many cards are in the deck, you know what hand you have now, you know how big the bet is. That's kind of what real life is like, but we don't have nearly as much information about how much it's going to cost us to learn more and how much learning more will improve our decisions.
Yeah, that's so true. But I
That's life. That's how we're
yeah.
living at all times. Yeah.
But like I also feel like you can get like, what is that feeling of like I feel like I know enough? Is that just like being a stupid 17-year-old boy and like feeling like I know everything? Or is that like, maybe you know what I mean? Like I feel like sometimes I feel like, yeah, like I know enough about this topic to like have a conversation about it.
Yeah. I don't think I want to comment on the wisdom of your perspective as a 17-year-old, and so like we all know what that feeling is like. We all know what it feels like to be prepared for something. You got to take a test. You know when you feel prepared for the test and when you feel unprepared for the test. And then sometimes it turns out you were wrong, right? So one of the things that happens with experience is those feelings of yours kind of get more calibrated to reality, right? The first time you took a test, say in whatever math class you're taking right now, you might have felt like, I'm totally ready for this test. I'm going to go take it. And then after the test, you're like, I was not ready for that test. But after you take a bunch of in the same class from the same teacher, you gain some experience and you kind of fine tune that sense of how much do you need to know to be ready, right? And sort of the more experience you have in life, hopefully those feelings, do I have enough information? Am I ready? Get more calibrated to the reality of the situation.
Speaking of math, earlier earlier that wasn't a joke. Why are you laughing?
It's a great segue. I loved it. I loved everything
Oh,
about it.
thank you. Yeah, I like math. I have a math tattoo, in fact. Do you want
Oh
to
my
see it?
goodness. Sure. I mean, depending where it is. Ooh, wait, I can't see what it's at. It looks like an integral
It's the
of some
fundamental
sort.
theorem of calculus. It's the one that's like DDT of like the
Yep.
integral, yeah, or DT, yeah.
Yeah. I mean, it's the fundamental theorem of
Yeah,
calculus, right? Say
of
no more.
course. Yeah,
Say
yeah.
less.
But there's
You
two of
know.
them, so it's the
Yeah,
it's the
okay.
first one. I
Yeah.
had to clarify.
No, yeah.
Um yeah, so I mean, I feel like to some extent, like there is a human part of math. Like, do you know about the Italian like school of algebraic geometry?
I don't think so.
So, like, in, like, the, like, late 1800s, like, there's this
Mhm.
field of math called algebraic geometry, and
Mhm.
in Italy, they had, like, a good bit about the field figured out.
Mhm.
At some point, though, they realized that, like, basically a lot of the foundational proofs they had made mistakes in.
Yeah.
And so a lot of the foundational theorems about the field were wrong.
Mhm.
And so they had to the schools of Italian algebraic geometry just basically collapsed. And this guy like Grothendieck had to rebuild a lot of it from scratch using a different like framework. And so like it's very scary like not knowing things. And again,
Mhm.
maybe this is just like a me thing, maybe this is an everyone thing. Do you know
Mhm.
like Chidi from The Good Place? I don't know if you know that
Yes.
show. Yeah,
Yes.
like
I mean, they
how
made a whole TV show about a philosophy professor, right?
yeah.
It's kind of required reading for those of us who do this for a living. Yeah.
So like how do we know we're not doing that? But also how do we not like is it the brain naturally does that. You're right, but like
Yeah. I mean, look, most of us spend most of our time thinking about things that we are pretty well equipped to handle. Okay. Why? Evolution, right? Evolutionarily, evolution is going to make sure that we take care of things like eating food, finding shelter. Ooh. Evolution is going to make sure that we take care of a whole bunch of very basic needs on a day-to-day level, right? And I don't think you get very worried about, do you know enough to handle your basic needs? So you don't wake up in the morning and panic about whether you're going to have clothes to put on, right? So there's a level of basic management of life that our cognitive systems are very well equipped to handle, and we tend to have enough information to get them done effectively moving through our day, and we tend to know when we have enough information to get them done effectively moving through our day, right? Where we start getting into a lot of trouble is when we sort of get out over our skis and we start thinking about some really big questions, because there's no good evidence that evolution equipped us to handle those big questions in an easy, effective way, right? Quantum physics, abstract theorems of mathematics, making sense of large scale political and societal movements, things like that, right? We were equipped by evolution to handle much more local matters. Interactions with people immediately around us. Yes, we can handle those. Interactions with societies consisting of, 350 million people, not so clear we're equipped to do that well. So you don't have to
so
panic, is my point.
yeah, okay.
Yeah.
Thanks for the
Yeah.
reassurance. But like often we do feel that like okay, for example, like, I'm going to college in like 6 months. And I
Mm-hmm.
know a fear that me and a lot of my friends have is like we don't
Mm-hmm.
know how to like function by ourselves. So I guess like there is a
That's true.
case.
You don't. Yeah. No. I have a high school senior also. Totally
Okay.
not yet equipped to function by themselves in a college environment.
Hmm. So I
They'll
guess
figure
like
it out. Yeah.
okay. We'll
You'll
figure it out
figure it out. Yeah.
Bayesian
Yeah.
via Bayesian updating. I
Yeah.
want to talk about Bayesian updating.
Yeah.
Like
Yeah.
what how do and also like how do we this is something I've always wondered. So when I was a kid, I was in like Hebrew school cuz I'm Jewish,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
and I one day I decided like I don't believe in God.
Mm.
And I told my Hebrew school teacher this, and she was like, "You should go talk to the rabbi." And I was like, "Okay, okay, new challenger, like bet."
Yeah. Right. Sure.
And
Bring it
so
on.
I was ready.
What
I
could
was
he
like,
know that you don't
yeah,
know?
yeah,
Right. I mean, come
exactly.
on. Right. Yeah.
And so I asked him, he was like, "Yeah, some days I feel like I don't believe in God either." And I was like, "Damn." And
You weren't ready for that response,
I
were
wasn't
you?
ready. I was
No.
ready
Yeah.
for like
No.
getting
Yeah.
into, I was ready to like go like counter like Pascal's wager. Like I was watching like Alex O'Connor.
Yeah.
I
Yeah.
watch do you know Alex O'Connor?
No. But I can
He's like a
imagine.
he's like a philosophy YouTuber now. He does, but when I was younger, he was like he did a lot of atheism stuff, and I was like watching him. Like I was like learning about Pascal's wager, and I was so
Mm-hmm.
ready. I was like, bring it on. And
Mm-hmm.
so yeah, that was his response. And one of the things we talked about is like, why is there suffering? And he basically said it's logically necessary
Mm-hmm.
that there is suffering because like and he built this argument for like logical necessity. And my response was, why couldn't God have built another world like where the rules of logic were different.
Mm-hmm. Right. Okay. So, wow, there's a huge amount to unpack there. So let's start at the beginning, right? So let's start with you stopped believing in God and you went to the rabbi, and the rabbi said, some days I don't believe in God either. Okay. For those people who don't know about Bayesian epistemology, which is this thing I do, the first step in Bayesian epistemology is recognizing that our opinions are often not all or nothing. Okay. So a lot of the time, folks are going to ask you, what do you believe? Right. I mean, there are songs about this, right? Do you believe in life after love? There's all these different songs. Do you believe in this? Do you believe in that? And the problem is, a lot of the time, our feelings about certain matters are a lot more subtle than that. I might not outright believe them, but I also might not outright disbelieve them. Right. And so the first step in Bayesian epistemology is to recognize that and to quantify it and to say, look, there are certain matters that we have high confidence in and certain matters that we have lower confidence in. And I think what you were imagining was when you went to your rabbi, that you would say, hey, rabbi, what about the existence of God? And you were imagining that your rabbi was going to have to max out on that one, right? Absolute 100% certainty is what you're expecting from your rabbi. And your rabbi was like, hey, maybe I'm not at 100% certainty, or maybe my level of confidence goes up and down. Some days it's higher, some days it's lower, right? And the Bayesian idea is to track that, to track people's different levels of confidence in different claims and how those things can go up and down in response to evidence. Okay. So that's the first thing out of the things you said, but maybe we ought to pause there for a sec. Thoughts, questions, idea.
Wait, so Bayesian epistemology, our beliefs go up and down. What about beliefs about the self? Yeah, what about beliefs about the self? Because, like, right, like when like at least me personally, I'm sorry for talking about myself a lot. I usually don't do this, but like when I'm like sad, I'm like, man, like I'm the worst ever. Like I'm so stupid. Like I'm so
Mm-hmm.
ugly. But when I'm
Mm-hmm.
happy, I'm like, man, I'm the goat. I'm so
Mm-hmm.
smart. I'm beautiful.
Yep.
I have the best
Mm-hmm.
personality ever.
Right.
And maybe you know, like I don't know. So like our beliefs about ourselves, I feel like for like a lot of people, maybe just me, maybe just a select, like are very
Mm-hmm.
variable. They're like y equals sine x. Um, yeah, I guess like how do we know? Is it just like an average? But like I feel like an average would apply to some like nice pattern where like taking an average would make sense. Like, but there are surely like pieces of data that like skew the mean.
Yeah. Okay. So that's interesting, right? Because what's happening is, in that case, your confidence in certain propositions about yourself is going up and down and up and down and up and down and up and down. And one of the things Bayesian epistemology has is it has rules for how and when you're allowed to change your degrees of confidence in a rational way. And look, we all know real human beings aren't rational. And so sometimes I wake up in the morning and I'm like, everything's terrible. And sometimes I wake up in the morning and I'm like, everything's great. Right? Those aren't rational changes in my level of confidence, right? Bayesianism says if you're going to change your level of confidence, it has to be because you gained or lost some evidence. You learned something, right? Or maybe you forgot something, right? So Bayesianism, it's a tough word to say, is going to tell you that rational changes in confidence are always due to changes in rational drivers of confidence, namely your information and your evidence, right? Then again, we all know that as real life people, our confidence goes up and down, especially our confidence in ourselves. And I guess what I would say to that is it's really interesting because your daily feeling like, am I the best? Am I the worst? Yeah, maybe that goes up and down. But then there are also some underlying beliefs about yourself that don't change, right? Like beliefs about what kind of person you are, maybe what your values are, how you feel about your family. And so one of the interesting things is when you feel bad about yourself, what do? You try to remind yourself of these more core, stable facts that you kind of have a constant outlook on. And you try to tether your feelings that are going crazy to a reality that you're more confident you actually know what's going on with. And maybe that helps. Yeah.
But like, and for those who don't know, what is Bayesian epistemology?
Okay. So Bayesian epistemology is, I'll explain where the name comes from in a minute. But what it is it's a set of rules. First of all, it's a way of representing your opinions. So we represent your level of confidence on a scale from 0 to 1, or if you want to do it in percentage, from 0% to 100%, right? So whatever, I'm 30% confident it's going to snow today, right? So that's the first thing you do, is you represent your confidence using numbers. Then the second thing you do is you have a bunch of rules for what it takes for those opinions to be rational. And some of the rules are about, how do my opinions need to look right now? So if I'm 30% confident that it is going to snow, I should be 70% confident that it's not going to snow. Okay? The Bayesian rules tell you those two things have to go together. Then Bayesianism also has a rule for changing your opinions over time as you gain evidence. And that rule, it's a mathematical rule. It uses a particular theorem of probability math. And the particular theorem in question was first written down by the Reverend Thomas Bayes. And because this theorem is so important to the way we think, this whole way of thinking is now known as Bayesian Epistemology. It's named after him.
Yeah, Bayes' theorem. I know ball. That's why this podcast is elite ball knowledge. Philosophy. Anyways, yeah, okay. So what if like our confidence in our in the case of like the self, right? Let's say I am 80% confident that I'm the most attractive person ever. But
Congratulations.
Thank you.
Yeah.
But I'm only 25% sure that my confidence is correct. Like I have confidence in my confidence levels because I know that my confidence levels shift.
Yep. Good. So that is what's known as a higher order confidence. So you have your confidence that you're an incredibly attractive individual, and then you could have,
which I am.
Again, no notes. Then you could have views about, is that confidence correct in some sense? Is it a correct response to your evidence? And that's what's known as a higher order confidence. A higher order confidence is a confidence about whether your first order confidences are rational or irrational. And there are Bayesian rules for how those things should interact, right?
What are those rules?
Oh my goodness. So the basic Bayesian rules go all the way back to Bayes, right? Reverend Thomas Bayes. Those go back a couple of centuries. The question of how exactly your higher order confidences should interact with your first order confidences is a current research project. And there are all sorts of papers that people have published in the past 10 years arguing for different ways that those rules should go. And I'll tell you why. Here's why it's become a super important field of research lately. Because it's very closely tied into how we respond to disagreement with other people. Okay?
Political polarization.
Yes, exactly. So I look at my evidence and I reach a conclusion and I think I'm doing great. I think I have reached the rational conclusion based on my evidence. I'm really confident, not just in my conclusion, but I'm also higher order confident that I did a good job. And then I run into someone else and they've looked at the same evidence and they've drawn the diametrically opposite conclusion. What should I do? Right? One thing it looks like I might do is drop my confidence, my higher order confidence that I did my reasoning correctly. Okay? And so this question about how should you feel about your own opinions? Should you think your own opinions are correct? Should you think they're correctly based on evidence? Should you think they're well-founded? That is really tied into, do these opinions survive encounters with people who really radically disagree? And back when we were living in a culture where a lot of people seem to have a pretty firm consensus on what conclusions you should draw from your evidence, that wasn't as hot a topic. But in the last decade or two, figuring out how we should rationally respond to encounters with people who are drawing radically different conclusions from the same evidence, that's become a real pressing concern. And that's generated a lot of this Bayesian inquiry into higher order evidence.
What do you think we should do? Like, because like, what if it just turns out that the people around you are like, just like falling for propaganda? And I'm sure that's what both sides think. And in that case, it wouldn't make sense to update your confidence. It would just like, or maybe it would just a little bit. Like, how do you know how much of your confidence to update by? And just be like, yeah, they're just like dumb.
So what's going to happen there is, I mean, we've all seen this, right? You have opinions not only about the world. So you have opinions about climate change. You have opinions about whether it was a good idea to bomb Iran, right? You have all these sort of first order opinions. And then you have opinions about whether your opinions are smart or stupid, whether your thoughts make sense. And now when you encounter someone, they're probably not going to just disagree with you about whether climate change is happening, whether we should, have bombed Iran, et cetera, et cetera. They're also going to disagree with you at that higher order about what are the right ways to think and whose conclusions make sense. And so it can be very, very hard to find common ground with people like that and retreat to some area where you can agree and some shared assumptions that you can use to kind of work out your problems and come to consensus. And there's been a lot of interesting discussion. So there's a guy named T. Wynn who wrote some really interesting material about epistemic bubbles, right? And one of the things he's really interested in is if you find yourself in a position where not only do you have opinions and you think your opinions are smart, but everyone you interact with has the same opinions and is telling you your opinions are smart, is there any way to break out of that? What could possibly happen in your life that would ever allow you to come to understand and see and even possibly adopt the opposite point of view?
Maybe the only thing is knowing about the epistemic bubble.
Okay.
Or like crisis.
Right? But the problem is some of the people in epistemic bubbles, and here I include myself, know that they're in an epistemic bubble and they think that's okay because they think they're right.
How would you know if you're right if you're in an epistemic bubble?
Well, okay, so what do you think about astrology?
It's a useful tool for like psychological symbolism, but I don't think it's like literally real. Like people use tarot cards if it helps people understand themselves by looking at certain symbols and trying to match them to their psyche. I don't think that's a bad thing, but if you're using it for like sports betting, I think that's detrimental because I don't think it's actually real.
Cool. Great. So you're in an epistemic bubble of people who share that opinion. You are
I don't
part
know
of
anyone
a
who
very
shares
large...
that opinion.
No, I mean, your opinion about astrology, you are in a group with a whole bunch of people that feel the same way about astrology that you do, right? It's a very large epistemic bubble, but it's a whole group of people who would say everything you just said about astrology is correct. Now, there's another group of people who think everything you just said about astrology is wrong and that astrology is real and that what's going on is you've been misled. My guess is that doesn't bother you very much, right? Because you are convinced that your epistemic bubble is doing things the right way, right? And so here you are, you're in an epistemic bubble. You're aware that you're in an epistemic bubble. You're aware that there is a group of people who disagree with you. And yet that is not undermining your confidence that you're doing it the right way. You're not going to go out after this and go investigate a whole bunch of astrology just in case those people have it right and you have it wrong.
This is a bad example because I did investigate astrology.
Oh my gosh. And what did you find out?
That it didn't really work.
And do the people who believe in astrology agree with you?
No.
Right.
I guess this goes back to what we were saying about like privileging certain information. Like
Yeah.
I'm going to, and everybody I think is going to privilege their experience over like evidence. And so like I feel like, and this explains I think a lot of the doubt in like climate change. Like if I'm in whatever a state where like it's like really warm and I think I know what climate change is, or it's really cold and I think I know what climate change is, I'd probably be like climate change isn't real because it's really cold. But like that's not what climate change is, obviously, and like
right,
that's just kind of like
okay,
not
good.
a
So
accurate conclusion.
This actually makes this an even better example. So you went out and you actually investigated the other point of view. You investigated astrology. Like, congratulations, a lot of people haven't done that and they still don't think astrology is worth thinking about, right? But notice what you just said, that people privilege their experience over evidence. Experience is another kind of evidence, right? And as we said before, experience can be really important. When we were talking about the math test, right? Your experience with math tests over time. Were you prepared? Were you not prepared? That can be a really important kind of evidence. So I wouldn't describe it as people privileging their experience over evidence. What I would say is all of us have a tremendous amount of evidence about how the world works. So when you're thinking about climate change, you have what you've read in books. you have what you learned in your classes, you have what videos you've seen online, you have your own experience with the weather. We have tremendous amounts of evidence. And what we all have to do is decide which parts of our evidence we're going to privilege, as you put it, and which parts we're going to downplay. And going back to what we were talking about before with the uniqueness thesis, the uniqueness thesis people think there's exactly one right way to do that. Okay. The balance between my own personal experience versus what I've read in the news, there's a unique, correct way to level out those two things. But a bunch of us, like me, who deny the uniqueness thesis, actually say different people are doing different things. They're weighing the different components of their evidence differently, and that can be okay. That can be all right to do, especially given the world they live in, the goals they have, what they're trying to do in their lives, et cetera, et cetera.
Let's just say the uniqueness thesis was true.
Mm-hmm.
How would we even know what that conclusion is? Because it's
Yes.
just saying that, like, there exists a unique conclusion
Mhm.
to draw. I feel like, okay, because, like, let's take, like, the situation in Gaza right now. Only know so many facts about that situation, and I don't have a PhD in, like, the history of that. If it was like the 1600s, 1700s, 1800s, there was only so much information that, like, existed in the world, and it was pretty easy, I feel like, to learn all of it. That's why there's so many polymaths, and there aren't that many anymore. Maybe this also has something to do with capitalism, but I digress.
Right. Be that as it may.
Yeah.
Yeah.
The because I don't have access to all of the evidence that exists in the world, and even to get, like, a small chunk of that, I would basically need a PhD. Like, that's what a PhD
Mhm.
is, to get all the information in, like, a specific subfield of a subfield.
Mm-hmm.
And, like, most people are not going to get a PhD. So, like, I feel like you can't even figure out what that conclusion is. And even if you can figure out what that conclusion is somehow,
Mm-hmm.
there's a good chance it's wrong just by way of the fact that, like, you don't have a PhD.
Yeah.
Or,
Okay.
like, or
So
not the formal
right.
title of a PhD, but you know what I mean, like that level of
Right.
understanding.
So we need to separate out a few things. One thing we need to separate out is the truth. As we established before, sometimes, even if you draw the unique, correct conclusion from your evidence, that might not be the truth. Okay, fine. So now the next thing we need to ask is, what is the correct conclusion to draw given the evidence that you have right now? Now, as you pointed out earlier, sometimes the reasonable thing to do is don't draw a conclusion based on your current evidence. Go out in the world and get more evidence. That would be great. Okay. But suppose you're faced with whatever evidence you have right now. So you, thinking about the situation in Gaza, you don't have a PhD. You haven't collected that level of evidence. Still, you have some evidence right now. And the question is, what is the right conclusion to draw from that evidence? And the question you started with is, how on earth would you ever figure that out? Now, there have been different opinions about this. So there was a philosopher named Rudolf Carnap in the middle of the 20th century. He believed in the uniqueness thesis, at least early on, and he thought that you could actually determine what conclusions you should draw from your evidence based on a special kind of logic, a sort of inductive logic. That there was a way of doing induction that was the unique, correct way, just like there's a way of doing deduction that's the unique, correct way, right? We call that deductive logic. Carnap thought there was an inductive logic, and if you were just rational enough and you thought about it hard enough, you could figure out what is the correct conclusion to draw from your evidence, the unique, correct conclusion. A lot of people think Carnap's program didn't work out, and so a lot of us think either there is no unique correct conclusion to draw from your evidence at a given time, and that was where he went wrong, or there are some philosophers who think there is a unique correct conclusion, but it's not always something you're capable of figuring out.
Why don't you believe in the uniqueness thesis? Like, what is your evidence against it?
So there's a lot of reasons, and I'll tell you a couple of them. First of all, this whole Carnap thing, it didn't work. And in fact, even by later in his own life, Carnap didn't think it worked, and he essentially gave up on the uniqueness thesis. And, Carnap was a really smart guy, and if he couldn't get this to work, what hope do the rest of us have? There are a lot of, when you look at how this would have to work, there are a lot of technical problems you can see that I've written some things that purport to prove that it's just never going to work the way Carnap thought it would work. Fine. That's like a technical thing inside Bayesian epistemology. Then there's broader considerations, okay? If you look at, for instance, the history of science, and you look at, Thomas Kuhn writing about scientific paradigms, different people have thought about scientific evidence in very different ways over the history of human thought, right? We mentioned Aristotle earlier. He thought about science in a very different way than people nowadays think about science. And I think it would be really strange to go back and say, you know what was wrong with Aristotle? It wasn't that he had so little evidence, because really, compared to us, Aristotle knew very, very little about not just the heavens, but most of the earth, right? But what if you said the real problem with Aristotle wasn't just that he lacked the evidence, it's that he was thinking the wrong way? That doesn't make a lot of sense to me. It feels like there are a lot of different ways to think, a lot of different ways to reason, and a lot of those could be correct. And that's okay, and we have to recognize that. And at the end of the day, the uniqueness thesis has to deny that. It has to say there's only one correct, right way of thinking, one correct way of reasoning from your evidence to a conclusion. And that just feels to me out of step with everything we know about the history of human thought.
Yeah, and it also feels kind of sad. Like, I wouldn't want that to be true. Because, like, I feel like that would erase so much of the human, like, let's say we could find, like, a nice algorithm for, like, the right way of thinking about stuff.
Mm-hmm.
That would make philosophy so boring, and it would also make a lot of, like, life boring because, like, I could just figure stuff out, and, like, deep down, I don't want to. It's like, I used to be, and still am pretty into pure math, as per my measure theory joke in the email I sent you.
And the tattoo.
And the
Right.
tattoo.
Don't forget the tattoo. Yeah.
I don't. I try not. I try to, but I don't.
Okay, good. Yeah.
And one of the things that made me, like, not as interested in it is the large language models. The
Mhm.
fact that, like, if I have, like, a cool idea for, like, a math problem, what was fun for me is, like, I could sit down and I could solve it, or I just need to learn more math.
Mhm.
And that's the only thing I can do.
Mhm.
But, like, now that there's, like, ChatGPT, I can't do that anymore. I can just plug it into ChatGPT.
Mhm. Yeah. I mean, the good news is, even if the uniqueness thesis is true and there's one right way to think, we probably don't have it. We're probably a long way from getting it. And even the LLMs are a long way from getting it, right? So I don't know if that's good news or bad news, but right. I mean, it's sort of dispiriting because once you get this uniqueness point of view, what you realize is everybody in history has probably been doing it wrong. And we're probably also doing it wrong right now. And then going back to what you were saying about higher order confidence versus lower order confidence, if I become really confident that there's one right way to think, and I become confident that I'm probably doing it wrong, what does that do to my confidence levels in all sorts of everyday matters, right? It's a little worrying.
It is. What do you think about AI? Like, what do you think's going to happen there, and how do you think it'll affect your field? How has it affected your field? Like, is there any papers or things that are being done with, like, a Bayesian epistemology towards, like, AI?
There's a lot of things being done. I mean, one of the things about LLMs is they use Bayesian tools in a lot of ways. And there's a great philosopher named Ben Levinstein who's really written a lot about how LLMs work. And if you really want to understand how LLMs work in a way that's accessible to fairly normal human beings, I'd suggest going and reading some of Ben Levinstein's Substack posts and things like that. But, LLMs work at a certain level on Bayesian thinking. And in fact, a lot of the spam filter on your email uses a Bayesian algorithm, right? So sort of Bayesian thinking has been in this field from the get-go. What's it going to do to the philosophy of Bayesianism? Right now, LLMs are not very good at doing Bayesian philosophy. I was part of a project recently, and I don't know, if there's a non-disclosure agreement, I probably shouldn't give too many details, but I was part of a project where we interacted with one of the very new versions of an LLM, and we just, had conversations with it about various Bayesian matters. And, its answers would not have been publishable in current, philosophy journals. Now, maybe, there are certainly ways in which I could use the LLMs to help me produce something that would be publishable in a philosophy journal. And I'm sure we're hitting the point where people are going to start, heck, I'm sure we have already hit the point where people are going to start asking LLMs to write papers and just submitting those straight to philosophy journals to see if they can get them published. I'm also an associate editor for a couple philosophy journals. I hope we're doing a good job of catching those things and not publishing them. One of the interesting disputes in philosophy right now is what rules should the journals have about publishing AI-assisted articles? That's a really interesting question. We are not yet at the point where the LLMs are going to take the place of the philosophers. I'm pretty confident about that.
Do you think, like, and what does it even mean for, like, an LLM to take the place of a philosopher? Like, what would that look
Well,
like?
put it this way. Suppose you wanted to know what are the rules for how higher order confidence should interact with lower order confidence? Well, one thing you could do is you could go read all of the articles that professional philosophers have published about this over the last decade and try to figure out for yourself what is the right answer. Here's a different thing you could do. You could open up ChatGPT and say, hey, ChatGPT, what is the answer to the question, how should my higher order confidence interact with my first order confidence? If you did that right now, ChatGPT would say something. What it would say is not up to the level of quality that I would expect from one of my philosophical colleagues.
Do you think it's like undergraduate level or like graduate level? Like what from the LLM you spoke to? Maybe like
Yeah.
I assume you teach.
Yeah. Here's what's interesting about it, right? I mean, all of us now, I think, have interacted with LLMs. And what I think we've all realized is that to try to rank an LLM, sort of like, suppose I said the LLM you interacted with, does it reason like a 4-year-old, an 8-year-old, a 12-year-old, a 16-year-old, whatever? That actually feels like the wrong scale because in some ways it does a lot better than your average 18-year-old. And in some ways it does a lot worse, right? Like sometimes an LLM will make really obvious math mistakes, right? And in the same paragraph, it'll say very, very sophisticated things that I would expect to come from one of my grad students. So then you ask me, is this LLM operating at the level of one of my undergrads? And I'll say, well, in the course of one paragraph, it is both saying things that are more sophisticated than my undergrads would say, and also making mistakes that my undergrads would never make, right? It's not on the same scale as humans. It's like operating on a different scale.
Yeah,
And when
access.
you
Yeah.
assess its quality, it kind of like cross cuts in all sorts of weird, interesting ways.
Yeah, you're right. The thing with like everyone was getting really there's this law, I forget what it is, but it's like AI is going to be better at say chess than
Mm-hmm.
gardening because or
Mm-hmm.
like agriculture because we have evolved over the course of billions of years to do certain tasks like to throw spears and to walk and to I don't know, yeah, like garden, like agriculture, right? Yeah. Whatever like I don't know.
I can't throw a
And
spear to save my life, literally, but okay. Right, we're
yeah,
good.
but like you could learn because
I
like
could learn. Yep.
but like you or you could throw stuff probably.
Yes, I can throw
Uh,
stuff. I play basketball, yeah.
yeah. Elite ball
Exactly.
knowledge.
Right, ball knowledge. I got all the
Yeah.
ball knowledge. Yeah.
Yeah. That's why you're on this podcast. And so like AIs and like or like even like robotics, right? Like it's very difficult to teach them how to walk because you don't have like 3 billion years.
Well, and the other thing that's really interesting about the LLMs is going back to your question before about how confident should I be at the higher level that my first order opinions are correct? An LLM, when you ask it a question, will report everything it says with the same seeming level of confidence, right? So it will tell you 9 things and it will sound equally confident in all 9 of them, even though 5 of them are correct and 4 of them are totally made up,
But if
right?
you ask it like which of these are you most confident in, will it be
Yes,
able
it really depends,
Hmm.
right? Because, of course, on our best understanding, and this gets to philosophy of mind, but on our best understanding, LLMs don't really have opinions. They don't actually have an opinion, which of these answers am I most confident in, which am I least confident in? Of course, being an LLM, it's very agreeable. And so if you ask it to tell you which ones it's most confident in, it'll say something. But what should we make of that? Right? Yeah.
I had a really good question. Oh, so like, okay, I have another question about the just like low orders of confidence, right?
Yeah.
So like, let's say, going back to the PhD thing, I am 40% sure
Mm-hmm.
that like if your confidence about something is less than, let's say, 50%,
Mm-hmm.
that means that your confidence about the opposite statement is greater than 50%.
Mm-hmm.
And so when is it rational, if your confidence about something is less than 50%, to switch your opinion?
Mm-hmm. I mean, it depends on your evidence, right?
Let's say like in
And
a
yeah.
bulk of evidence, with a lot of evidence.
And look, sometimes you have a bunch of options and you don't have greater than 50% confidence in any of them, right? Like, if you asked me, who do I think is going to win next year's Super Bowl? And you gave me all the teams, I don't have greater than 50% confidence of any particular team that it's going to win, right? For every team you give me in the NFL right now, if you asked my confidence that that team is going to win the next Super Bowl, it would be way below 50%. Now, of course, once the NFL season starts, my confidences start changing, and then the playoffs start. And by the time we get to the Super Bowl, whatever two teams are in the Super Bowl, one of those teams, I'm probably going to be more than 50% confident that it's going to win. Right. And what has changed? What's changed is I've gotten more and more evidence as the season and as the playoffs went along. And that's perfectly rational. That makes total sense.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah.
I want to also ask, do you think that like that AI will replace philosophy? Like in some sense, like, because already we're seeing a lot of the humanities get gutted. I think that your field is probably doing something more useful, like to the average person, than like a lot of more metaphysical or like highly abstract, like infinite dimensional, like category theory or whatever fields of math and philosophy. But still, like, I'm very scared about, and we can talk about this like on a Bayesian level, like
Mm-hmm.
what should, let's say, someone like me major in college? Because
Mm-hmm.
like on one hand, like whatever I don't know what's gonna happen in the future, but like I think my personal opinion is that philosophy will be one of the last degrees worth having. And I don't mean like
Mm-hmm.
last degree is in like the worst degree. Last degree is in like chronologically last degree, because the nature of philosophy is that, like you said, I could put into ChatGPT like how should I reason about higher order levels of confidence, but I won't internalize it because that's not how my brain evolved. And part of like, I don't really like, honestly, like the answers to a lot of philosophical questions, once you get into them, it's like it's not even about like the destination, it's just about the journey,
Mm-hmm.
man. And I hope I don't sound like a hippie,
Right.
but I feel like it's true.
Okay, so again, you said a lot of things. So I think one of the things to understand is to the extent the humanities are being gutted, to the extent that enrollments in various humanities have been dropping, that actually has nothing to do with AI for the large part. That predates AI. If you look at the trends in most humanities majors, those have been going down before AI was even a factor. So I actually think that has very little to do with AI. Philosophy major numbers have actually remained pretty good by and large. But anyway, of course, then there's this question about funding for the humanities, and that also has been gutted. But again, I think that has very little to do with AI, and I think it has to do with political things and why funding for research across the board has been gutted in both the sciences and the humanities, right? So that's a whole political battle. But this question of, in the face of AI, which disciplines are going to last and which things are worth majoring in? One of the things is I've been around a little bit longer than you.
Really.
Trying to predict how a technological change is going to affect society almost never works out, right? So if you think about the internet, okay, I was around when the internet started and when the internet started getting popular. Literally, no one predicted that perhaps the most important effect of the internet was going to be social media. And even the people who invented social media didn't predict what its effects were going to be on society and culture and politics in the world, right? So every time we have one of these new technologies, there are a ton of people claiming they know what's going to happen, and almost all of them turn out to be wrong. Right? I mean, heck, you throw enough darts at a board, one of them sooner or later is going to hit the bullseye. So you could probably find someone who in 1995 predicted the effects of social media on
That's just
global politics, but at the time, no one was listening to that person, I can guarantee you, right? And so this idea that right now LLMs are here and we know they're going to change everything and we can predict how they're going to change everything, I'm very, very dubious about that.
But like, could we predict at least that it will change everything, not necessarily what it will change?
It never changes everything, right? It always changes some things and leaves some things alone. Same with the internet, right? And so the real trick is to figure out, I mean, that's the one prediction that I think yes, it's going to change some things and it's not going to change other things. Okay, the real trick is to figure out which things it's going to change. And so getting to this question about college majors, right? A college major imparts on you a certain body of knowledge, but it also imparts in you a certain set of skills. And one of the great things about the philosophy major is that it imparts upon people a set of skills that turn out to be useful for a wide variety of things you might go on to do in your life. I mean, look, hardly any philosophy majors go on to become professional philosophers, right? Just sheer math. Right now at my university, University of Wisconsin, Madison, we have about almost 200 philosophy majors. There just aren't enough places for professional philosophers in the world to think that all those people are going to become professional philosophers. Almost all of them are going to go on to do something else. But hopefully, we've given them a set of skills that are going to be useful to them in whatever they go on to do. And I mean, you're about to go into college and you're going to have to pick a major. People are like, oh my gosh, I have to go do a business major because I have to learn about how business works. Or I've got to be pre-law so I can go to law school. My father was an attorney, and he said he went to law school and almost none of the content he learned in his classes was at all useful in being an attorney for his entire career. What was useful was learning a particular way to think. And so I think the thing to do in college is, number one, learn how to think. And you can learn how to think in almost any major. And then number two, explore stuff that you're interested in. Because once you get out of college, I mean, you're in college and there are all these different classes you can take in all sorts of different areas. And they're just there and people are just offering them to you, right? They're like, here, come sit in a room with me for 14 weeks and I will teach you all about the history of Gaza, Italian mathematicians, whatever it is you want to learn. That is one of the last opportunities you're ever going to have in your life to be invited to wander into rooms where you can learn about almost anything. And so just take advantage of that, right? Don't spend all your time worrying about, oh my gosh, how is this going to set me up for what comes next? Just go out there and explore and be interested in stuff because that becomes so much harder to do the farther you go in your life.
Thank you. That was good
You're welcome.
advice. I usually end
you often ask for advice. So there, I gave you some free advice.
You watched the other episode.
Yes.
Yeah, all of my episodes I've ended with asking for advice.
Well, there you go.
I'm still going to ask you for advice at the end of the episode. But you have to give different advice because I already gave that
I'll come
one.
up with some other advice.
Not yet, though. Not yet, because I have a couple more questions that I'm thinking that I thought of.
Right.
One of them is that you never answered. Well, this is not a question. This is a statement. You never answered what I was saying about God and the rules of logic. Like, why?
Yes, the rules of logic. Good. So, could the rules of logic have been different? This is a very old theological question, right? Because people from certain religious traditions think that God is omnipotent and God can do anything he wants, right? And so one of the old theological questions is, could God have made the laws of logic different? Right? Luckily for me, I don't belong to one of those theological traditions, so I don't have to think about that. The idea that the laws of logic could have been different, I think is actually a very challenging one, and it's difficult to imagine how that might be. Right? And one of the interesting things, I just published a paper about this. One of the things that's hard about imagining how the laws of logic could have been different is
we're using the laws of logic.
Our brains are trapped using logic a particular way. So if I try really thoroughly to imagine a universe in which the laws of logic are different, at the end of the day, I have to use my own brain to do that. And so my thought process about what that world would be like is governed by the laws of logic that my brain is trapped using.
And I think that's also why, like, when I read Meditations by Descartes, I was like, this is so dumb because he's using the laws of logic to doubt everything he knows, and one of the things he knows is the laws of logic. Like, if you ask
Mhm.
like a toddler, like, and this goes back, this is like I think a very Bayesian comment. If you ask a toddler like about something, a lot of the answers they give are really dumb. But like they're actually really smart if you have as much context as they do.
Mhm. Yeah. I mean, look, I have 3 kids, and being a philosopher, when they were toddlers, I used to ask them all sorts of, like, tricky, logic-y questions just to see what they would do,
What
right?
did they do?
Well, so my oldest kid, God, must have been about, like, 2. They go through this phase where they're sort of, like, feeling out their own power, and so when you ask them to do things, they'll just say no, right? So I was talking to my kid, I was like, "Hey, could you, eat your cereal?" And they'd be like, "No." And then I'd be like, "Could you put on your clothes?" And they'd be like, "No." And I'd be like, "Could you, take your bowl to the sink?" And they'd be like, "No." And finally, I got really frustrated, and I was like, "Hey, could you say no to me?" And I remember very clearly Claire heard that question and went, and then paused and just started laughing. And I was like, "We're in big trouble with this. This one understands logic at a deeper level that I'm not sure I was ready for." Yeah. Yeah.
You say your father was an attorney.
Yes.
Was he a philosophy major in undergrad?
Gosh, no. He was a psychology major, and for a long time when I started doing philosophy, he thought it was kind of worthless. I finally managed to talk him out of that. I finally managed to get him to see the point of what I was doing, but, it took a while.
What do you think the point is of what you're doing?
Honestly, the reason I do it is for 2 reasons. First of all, I love teaching. I've always loved teaching. I used to be a high school teacher. I love teaching. But second of all, there are questions I want the answers to. And I am lucky enough that I have a job where for a living, someone pays me to think about questions that I want the answers to. How great for me. I get to spend my
Yeah.
time thinking about these things that I really want to know. And I get to talk to a whole lot of interesting, smart people who are also trying to figure out the answers to the same questions. And gradually, over a very long period of time, we make some progress on getting towards the answers.
Yeah, like I think and maybe that is part of like the I guess maybe like the shareholders won't see it this way. But I think on like an individual level, that is part of the what I was saying about like the philosophy major.
Yeah.
Like part of the reason I think ChatGPT and AI won't replace philosophy is because it's fun.
Hmm. It's a very particular kind of fun. Not everyone finds it fun, but there's a group of us who really enjoy it.
Yeah. I enjoy it.
Yeah.
That's why I started a podcast about it.
I That makes sense to me.
Okay. Now, what advice do you
Okay,
have?
advice. So let's see. So you're a senior in high school, is that right?
Yes.
Okay. You don't have to tell me, but do you already know where you're going to college, or are you still working on that?
We will find out like in the next week.
Yes, that's exactly where my senior is also. Okay. So here's what's going to happen to you, okay? You are at a point in your life where you're going to go through a series of stages, and at every one of those stages, all the adults you meet are going to have a standard question for you. So right now, everyone wants to know where you're going to college. You're going to get to college, and everyone's going to want to know what's going to be your major. And then you're going to get to like your junior or senior year, and everybody's going to want to know what are you doing after college. And then you're going to get out of college, and you're going to do whatever you're doing, and then maybe you're going to like have a partner, and then everyone's going to want to know when are you getting married. And then they're going to want to know when are you buying a house? And then they're going to want to know when are you having kids? And you're just sort of like for the next, I don't know, decade of your life, there's just this sort of set of guideposts that everyone is going to expect you to hit next. And they're going to want to know when are you going to hit that guidepost? What are you going to do for that guidepost? How are you planning to hit that guidepost? And at a certain level, it can just become entirely exhausting. And I think the advice, and honestly, this really ties into the advice that I gave you before, don't let your life be run by those guideposts all the time. Don't spend all your time thinking about, oh my gosh, I have to get to this milestone next. What do I need to be doing right now to get to that milestone? Because in the long run, that's no way to live your life. And you are at the one part of your life right now for about the next decade or so where you can really try out a bunch of things, exercise a whole bunch of freedom, and the consequences aren't nearly as bad as you think they are. You can screw up in really bad ways and it will still work out okay. And so what that should do is it should free you up to try a bunch of things and not be so conservative and anxious all the time about making the decision that will help you get to the next one of those guideposts, so that everyone around you will be reassured that you're going to be okay and that it's going to land, right? You should just, as I was saying before, try stuff out. Enjoy the freedom that you're being allowed right now. People in their 20s, it used to be that you got out of college, you went into some career and you stayed in that career, in some cases for the rest of your life. Nowadays, people in their 20s try out all sorts of different things. People get out of college and they try one job and then they try another job and maybe they get fired from a job, and it's okay, right? You can still land somewhere. And these things will eventually get ironed out, and they don't have the sorts of permanent consequences they would have if, like, you had a family and you had kids and you got fired from your job, right? That would be a much more serious situation, right?
Yeah.
For now, even though everyone's going to be asking you all the time about what's next, don't let your life be entirely governed by what's next all the time.
Thank
Because
you
that's
for
no
the
way to live.
advice.
There you go.
Yeah. I appreciate it. That was good advice. That's very applicable to my situation.